Good afternoon. We will start this session of the course of English language for the second level of psychology in the Department of Psychology in the Faculty of Human and Social Sciences in University of Clemson. This is the ninth session, and we will continue to deal with the Gestalt psychology approach, and this is a very important approach, like the last approaches that we mentioned earlier. And here we ended the last session by saying that there is a relation the perceptual attributes such as size, shape, color, brightness, movement, etc., are relationally determined, and which means that there is a context by which we can understand and elaborate meaning about this or that object which is perceived, and which means that we cannot perceive anything in isolated. And the most important idea is that the context is very important to perceive and to build the meaning of the object perceived by the subject. And on the other hand, there is a difference between the object which is in the external world and the perception by which the subject is perceiving the object from its internal brain and cognition. And in other words, the cognition, as it is shaping again the object which is external by the activity of the perception. The object, externally speaking, is transformed when the internal activity of the perception is activated by the subject, and the perception allows the subject to reshape the object. And from this perspective, we Gestalt psychology criticized a constancy hypothesis, which said that there is a kind of there is a correspondence and a clear correspondence between the physical characteristic of the object or the stimulus and the psychological attributes of the resulting sensation. And this is the most sharp critiques that comes from Gestalt psychology against constancy hypothesis. And we mentioned various examples which are confirming, which confirmed what we said about the supremacy, the powerful critics that comes from Gestalt psychology against constancy hypothesis. We add to that relational determination also plays a crucial role in many cognitive and physiological functions other than sensation and perception, while it is central in perceptual organization as in controlling what aspect of a complex sensory input will be perceived as figure and which are ground. And this is also an important idea because it is at the core of productive thinking. And these are other principles which are referring to principles of Gestalt psychology, referring here to the figure and the ground. Here, the figure and the ground. And here we have various, if you want, various examples, but that can confirm what we are referring to. Here, for example, we mentioned, for example, here we have the ground, and yeah, there are various examples, of course. Yes. Just I will give you some example like the figure and the ground. We already mentioned this principle, but I will give you another example by which we can understand in a better way what we are referring to now. And here I will mention to you what's the idea of the figure and the ground. And this is here, for example, yes, for example, here we have the figure and the ground. We can either see as a figure two faces, somebody who is looking to somebody, two faces facing each others, two persons whom are facing each other, and they are in the black, and the vase of, for example, a vase of the flowers is the ground and the sorry, the ground and the figure. Yes. Here we mention the ground, the figure is the faces, and the ground is the vase. And we can also see the vase, and which becomes a ground, and the faces become the figure. And you know that we can move to this ground, to that ground, and when one is a ground, one form is a ground, the other becomes a figure, and when the figure is transformed to the ground, which is a ground, becomes a figure, and vice versa. You know that this is one of the main examples which are reflecting the principle of the ground and the figure in the theory of Gestalt psychology. And here we come back to the text, the PDF file. Here we can refer while it is centered in perceptual organization, as in controlling what aspect of complex sensory input will be perceived as figure and which as ground. It is also at the core of productive thinking, because when we are focusing on the faces, and we are not which means that at the same time we are not in other words, we are producing this or that meaning when we are, for example, when we are focusing on these faces, we are producing a particular meaning that is conveying the idea that this face is facing another face, this person is facing another person, which means that the vase doesn't make sense for the subject who is perceiving these two faces which are facing each other. And when we are focusing on the vase of the flower, for example, we are producing another meaning, and the vase, when the vase of the flower makes sense, the two faces are not perceived, which means that these two faces doesn't make sense. And we can move to this meaning to that meaning, but when we focus on this meaning, we are dismissing the other one, and vice versa. And which means that the principle of the ground and the ground and the figure is one of the most important idea when we refer to the idea of the form and the ground, and the figure and the ground. And it is producing meaning, and it is a way by which we can think in this or that way. And to think is always in this or that way, which means that we are focusing on this or that idea, and at the same time we are not focusing on the other ideas, or we are putting away the other ideas, and which means, in other words, that there is a central idea inside our mind, and what is central is central compared to what is in the margin. And the idea of the figure and the ground could be a principle in during the process of learning anything. And this principle was also applied in various learning situations, etc. And also, to solve a problem productively, it is necessary to understand what aspects of it are essential and which are superficial or irrelevant, as well as the critical interrelations among the core aspects. In most psychological wholes or gestalten, the parts are not indifferent to each other, but are mutually interdependent, and this reflects again the idea of the context, which is very important. For example, when we think about this or that word, for example, word, or this or that idea, and when we are reading this text, or we are listening to somebody who is speaking, if we focus on just one word, and we are not connecting this word to what this speaker was saying before expressing this or that word, and after expressing this or that word, we cannot understand in clearly speaking and relevantly the whole speech of the speaker. And the reason why The idea, again, the idea of the context and the idea of the whole is very important here. And this is another important, very important principle in Gestalt psychology. Which means that most psychological wholes or Gestalten, the parts are not indifferent to each other, which means that there is mutual interdependence and the interaction between various things which are connected. And indeed, the attributes, and when we refer here, for example, to other examples, referring to the idea of the context. Here we have, for example, we can mention, for example, here another principle or another example. For example, here we can mention, for example, we can mention here this, for example, this here, for example, we can mention this this form and this triangle, which are forming when we connect between all of them, all these parts which are representing various triangles. Some of them are bigger than the rest. The bigger triangles are in the black color, and the small triangles are in white color. And when we connect between all of them, we are seeing a circle. And here the idea of the context is again very important, because even that we are seeing the parts which are representing small and big triangles in two different colors, respectively black and white. But when we connect all these triangles, we are seeing another form, which is a circle. And this is also another important point, which is referring to the idea of the context. And this is very important, and this is a very important principle in Gestalt psychology. There is also productive thinking involves transforming a confused and fuzzy, meaningless view of a problem into a clear conception of it that takes all the relevant features into account. Such reorganization or restructuring of the problem results in insight, understanding, and its solution if the reorganization is adequate to the central features of the problem. And here the idea of the whole and the idea of interconnected interconnected relationship between the various parts are very important to reach a productive thinking and a positive thinking and constructive thinking. Because when we think and we try to resolve a problem, the solving problem consists to transform confused, fuzzy, meaningless view of a problem into a clear conception. And In this case, we have to take into account all these all the features that constitute the problem to be resolved, and consequently we have to take into account all the features that constitute the problem, which means that we need to reorganize and to restructure, to structure again the components of the issue that we are dealing with, and to think and to ponder on these components of the issue. And this is again this is related again to the idea of the whole, which is that we brought from Gestalt psychology, and it reflects also the idea, of it convey the idea of the context and the interconnection between various components which are at the first time confused and fuzzy, but we need to transform them in an interrelated connection, and that's what creates or that's what allows the subject to move from what is confused to what is clear. And this is the process by which we can say we are resolving a problem. And this view of problem solving and of learning contrasted sharply in its emphasis on meaningfulness with the views of learning that prevail in other schools, which instead emphasize blind contiguity in space and time, as in traditional associationism and as in the process of classical conditioning that was considered prototypic of learning by behaviorists. And this is a sharp critique toward behaviorism and toward the other classical approaches in learning theories. And the top-down approach of the Gestalt theorists, making the whole primary, was the opposite of the bottom-up approach typical of psychologists in other schools, which began with elements such as sensations or stimuli and responses, and studied how they combine to add up to a whole. And this is, of course, the idea of the top-down approach, which are related to Gestalt psychology, is at the opposite of the bottom-up approach, which is specific, or which is reflecting, for example, associationism or behaviorism. And because these theories are starting by the principle that we are seeing part things, and we are seeing the object partially, and step by step we are combining between all these elements, and we are at the end seeing the whole part of the object. At the opposite of this approach, the top-down approach of Gestalt psychology is starting by the idea of perceiving the whole. Then from the whole we are seeing we are seeing we are perceiving the elements which are composing the whole form of the object. But at the same time we are always combining between these parts or elements, and we are always moving from the whole. We are starting by perceiving the whole, then we are moving step by step to the element or the parts of what is perceived in globally. and at the same time, but we are not perceiving the element part by part, but we are perceiving the elements in their connectedness, and then we are moving again from perceiving the element in partially but in their connectedness, and we are moving again to the idea of the whole, and this is typically related to the approach which is named by Gestalt psychology. And this is the main idea that we have to mention about and to focus about Gestalt psychology. And by these principles that we mentioned, Gestalt psychology made a turning point compared to associationism, and compared to behaviorism, and compared and also compared to constancy hypothesis, because all these approaches are focusing on the part rather than the whole, and they are dismissing the idea of the context, and also they are rejecting the idea of the supremacy of the subject toward the object, and also they are rejecting the idea of the interconnectedness between various elements, and all this all what was rejected by these approaches referring to associationism, behaviorism, and constancy hypothesis was highlighted by Gestalt psychology, referring to the idea of the context, referring also to the idea of the supremacy of the subject toward the object, and also referring to the idea of the whole compared to the part of the object, and referring also to the idea of the connectedness between various elements that are constituting the whole form of the object, and also the idea of the whole which is more than its parts. All these principles are very, very important, and the idea also of the idea of the ground on the figure, and there are also other ideas, but we stop here because we are giving I'm giving just a brief idea about Gestalt psychology, and thank you for your attention.